I'm 68 years old now, living in a studio apartment in Portland where the closest thing to wilderness is the potted fern my neighbor keeps dying. The sounds here are sirens and garbage trucks, not the wind through old-growth cedar or the creak of trees settling in the cold. Safe sounds. Human sounds. But every morning I wake up knowing what I left behind in those mountains, and every morning I wonder if I made the right choice. My name is Henrik Bergstrom, and for 37 years I was a Forest Service ranger in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in southern Washington. Third generation, actually. My grandfather immigrated from Sweden in 1923, got work with the Civilian Conservation Corps, and our family's been managing these woods ever since. By the time I took over the Fire Creek district in 1986, I knew every ridge and watershed like the lines on my own palm. I need to tell you this because of what happened 3 months ago. Because there are things in those forests that aren't supposed to exist, and because the government knows about them. Has known for a very long time. It started on a November morning in 1987. Early season snow had come in heavy, maybe 8 inches overnight, and I was doing a routine patrol of the logging roads in Sector 7. This was back when we still had active timber operations up there, before the spotted owl controversy shut most of it down. The woods were that particular kind of silent you only get after fresh snowfall. Sound dampened like the world was wrapped in cotton. I found the tracks at mile marker 14, where the road curved around Thornton Creek. Now, I'd seen bear tracks my whole life. Black bear, the occasional grizzly wandering down from Canada. These weren't bear tracks. They were footprints, clearly defined heel, arch, 5 toes. Bipedal, human-shaped. Except they were 19 inches long and nearly 8 inches wide, pressed deep into the snow, deeper than my own boots sank even though I outweighed most men. The stride length was over 6 feet. I stood there in the snow, my breath fogging in the morning air, and felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of the world. You hear stories, of course. Growing up in logging country, you hear plenty of stories about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Tourist towns sell the trinkets, documentaries come through looking for footage, and the old-timers at the Timberline Tavern will tell you things after their 4th whiskey. I'd always figured it was a mix of misidentified bears, hoaxes, and the human tendency to see patterns in chaos. But I was looking at something that couldn't be explained away. The tracks led off the road and into dense timber, heading upslope toward the ridge. Against every bit of my training about following unknown wildlife, I followed them. For 2 hours, I tracked those prints through the snow, watching the stride shorten on steep sections, lengthen where the terrain leveled. This thing was navigating the landscape with purpose, choosing efficient routes through the understory. Intelligent movement. The trail ended at a rock overhang about 3 miles in, a natural shelter tucked under a granite outcrop. The snow under the overhang was trampled flat, and there were signs of long-term occupation. Fire-blackened stones arranged in a circle, bones from deer and elk stripped clean, carefully broken. And there, half hidden in a crevice, I saw them. 2 smaller prints, maybe 12 inches long. A juvenile. I stood there as the implications settled over me like the cold. A family. There was a family of these things living in my forest. That's when I smelled it. That overwhelming musky odor everyone describes, like wet fur and rotting meat and something else. Something I couldn't place. My ranger training kicked in. Large animal nearby, establish distance, avoid threatening behavior. I backed away slowly, hands visible, the way you're supposed to with bears. I made it maybe 20 yards before I saw it watching me from behind a massive cedar. The face is what I remember most from that first encounter. It was like looking at something that shouldn't exist. Too human to be an animal, too animal to be human. Flat nose, heavy brow ridge, eyes that caught the filtered sunlight and reflected it back amber gold. The thing was at least 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark reddish-brown hair except for its face and palms. Female, I realized, seeing the pronounced breasts beneath the hair. We stared at each other for what felt like an hour but was probably 30 seconds. Then she made a sound, low, rumbling, complex. Not quite a growl, not quite language, but something that carried meaning I couldn't parse. A warning, maybe, or a question. I raised my hands higher. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the fear electric in my veins. "I'm leaving, and I won't come back. I won't tell anyone." She watched me back away, that alien face unreadable. When I finally turned and walked, not ran, every instinct screaming that running would trigger chase behavior, I could feel her eyes on me the entire way back to the road. I didn't report it, didn't tell my supervisor, didn't file an incident report, didn't mention it to anyone. I went home to my cabin, poured 3 fingers of whiskey, and sat in front of the fire thinking about what I'd seen. Here's what I knew. If word got out that there were Sasquatch in Gifford Pinchot, multiple things would happen. Researchers would descend on the area, trophy hunters looking to make history, media circus, and eventually, because this is how humans work, someone would kill one. Kill it and display it and destroy whatever life it had managed to carve out in these shrinking wild places. Or, and this seemed just as likely, the government would get involved. Classify it. Make it disappear along with anyone who'd seen it. So I made a decision that night that would define the next 4 decades of my life. I would protect them, keep people away from Sector 7 as much as possible, monitor their presence, make sure they stayed hidden. 3 weeks later, I found a deer carcass on my cabin porch. Field dressed, gutted, the meat still fresh. It was arranged carefully, deliberately, on a flat piece of bark. When I looked at the tree line, I saw her there in the shadows, watching. She turned and melted into the forest before I could react. I understood. She was acknowledging the bargain. I kept her secret and she... what? Accepted my presence? Trusted me not to bring others? The sociology of it was beyond anything I could comprehend. Over that first winter, I saw signs of them regularly. Tracks in the snow, trees broken at the 8-foot level, the wood twisted in ways that would take immense strength, arrangements of rocks that marked what I came to recognize as territorial boundaries. And occasionally, late at night when I was on patrol, I'd hear the calls, those long, haunting howls that made something primitive in my hindbrain light up with terror. By spring of 1988, I'd modified my patrol patterns to check on them without getting too close. I learned where they denned, where they hunted, the routes they traveled between water sources. There were 4 of them. The female I'd first seen, a massive male who had to be 9 feet tall and 700 pounds, and 2 juveniles. A family unit. The thing about secrets is they calcify inside you. They become part of your structure, load-bearing walls you build your life around. I stopped dating after my girlfriend Karen got frustrated with my evasiveness about where I spent my time. I turned down promotions that would have moved me to other forests. I became known as the ranger who liked isolation, who preferred the backcountry to the office, who was a little odd but competent enough that they left me alone. And every year, I watched that family survive in a world that was shrinking around them. Logging came closer. Hiking trails expanded. Cell towers went up. But I kept people away from their core territory, filed reports about unstable slopes and aggressive bears, closed trails for erosion concerns, routed new logging operations around their range. They knew what I was doing. I'm certain of that. The male would sometimes parallel me on patrols, staying just out of sight but letting me know he was there, protecting me while I protected them. The juveniles grew up. I watched them over the years, tracked their maturation. One left, probably around age 15, struck out for new territory. The other stayed, had young of its own. 3 generations, 37 years, until 3 months ago, when everything fell apart. The helicopter made its first pass over Fire Creek on August 15th. I was at the sector station doing paperwork when I heard it. Not the usual Forest Service chopper doing fire patrol, but something different. Heavier rotors, flying a grid pattern. I went outside and watched it, through binoculars. Black, unmarked, sophisticated camera equipment visible mounted on the undercarriage. The kind of surveillance gear you don't see on civilian aircraft. It made 3 complete passes over the northern section of my district, flying low enough that the rotor wash bent the treetops. Right over where the family had their summer grounds. My stomach went cold. In 37 years, I'd managed to avoid this. Whatever this was. The helicopter came back every day for 2 weeks. Different times, different patterns, but always covering the same area. I filed a complaint with my supervisor about unauthorized aircraft in the district. She checked with the regional office. They checked with the FAA. Nobody had any record of approved flights in that airspace. That's when I knew for certain. This was federal, and it was off the books. I hiked up to the summer grounds on August 29th, something I rarely did anymore. The family knew me, but I still tried to minimize direct contact. What I found made my hands shake. Fresh boot prints, multiple people, military-grade tread patterns. They'd set up what looked like monitoring stations around the entire territory. Trail cameras, but not commercial ones. These were matte black, no manufacturer logos with satellite uplinks. Audio recording equipment hidden in tree cavities. Soil sampling sites marked with small GPS locators. Someone was conducting a comprehensive study of the area, which meant they knew. They knew something was there, and they were gathering data. I checked on the family that night, hiking in by headlamp even though every instinct told me to stay away. I found them at the rock overhang where I'd first discovered them all those years ago. The matriarch, the same female I'd encountered in 1987, now ancient by their standards, her hair streaked with gray, was there with her daughter and 2 grandchildren. The big male had died 4 years earlier. I'd found his body and buried it deep, then spent 3 days scrubbing the site clean. They were agitated. The youngsters stayed close to their mother, and the old female kept scanning the forest, her nostrils flaring. They smelled the intruders, knew something had changed. I wanted to warn them somehow, but what could I do? Put up a sign? They were intelligent, but they couldn't read English, and I'd never established any communication beyond basic respect for boundaries and the occasional peace offering of salmon from the creek. Instead, I did what I could. I started systematically dismantling the surveillance equipment, carefully so it would look like equipment failure rather than sabotage. Disabled cameras, cut wires and made it look like animal damage, moved sensors so they pointed at nothing useful. It took me 3 weeks of careful work, always at night, always cautious. It didn't matter. On September 18th, I got called into the district supervisor's office. There were 2 men waiting there in addition to my boss. They didn't wear uniforms, but everything about them screamed federal agents. Dark suits, government-issue vehicles in the parking lot, that particular blend of courtesy and absolute authority. Henrik Bergstrom? The older one said. Late 50s, gray hair, eyes like ice. I'm Special Agent Reeves. This is Agent Chen. We need to talk about Sector 7. My supervisor looked uncomfortable. Henrik, these gentlemen are with... They have jurisdiction regarding some concerns in your district. Concerns? I kept my face neutral. Equipment failures, Agent Chen said. She was younger, 30s maybe, with the look of someone who'd been military before whatever agency this was. Extensive equipment failures, specifically targeted at monitoring systems we installed. You wouldn't know anything about that? I filed complaints about unauthorized aircraft and ground equipment, I said carefully. This is a protected wilderness area. Installing surveillance equipment without Forest Service approval is illegal. We have the necessary approvals, Reeves said, from levels of government you don't usually interact with. The equipment was there for wildlife monitoring purposes. What kind of wildlife? They exchanged a glance. Chen pulled out a tablet, turned it toward me. The screen showed footage from one of their cameras, the ones I'd missed or hadn't gotten to yet. Thermal imaging, false color display. And there, clear as day, were the heat signatures. 4 large bipedal forms moving through the forest at dusk. The scale indicator showed them at 8 to 9 feet tall. My heart was hammering, but I kept my expression blank. Bears, probably standing on their hind legs. These bears have been observed in this area for 37 years, Reeves said quietly. Coincidentally, exactly as long as you've been the ranger for this district. You've filed over 200 reports rerouting access, closing trails, and generally restricting human presence in a specific territory that exactly corresponds with the movement patterns of these subjects. Subjects. Not animals. Not wildlife. Subjects. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Chen leaned forward. Ranger Bergstrom, we're not here to cause problems for you. We're actually impressed with how you've managed this situation. 37 years of successful containment is remarkable, but things have changed. We have technology now that makes continued concealment impossible. We've detected similar populations in 6 other locations across the Pacific Northwest. This isn't something one ranger can keep hidden anymore. What do you want? I asked. Cooperation, Reeves said. You know these subjects. You've observed them longer than anyone else alive. We need you to help us bring them in, safely, humanely, for study and protection. Bring them in. I let the words hang there. Like specimens. Like an endangered species that needs to be protected, Chen said. Think about it. Climate change is destroying their habitat. Human encroachment is constant. How long before some hunter with a rifle and a camera decides to make himself famous? If we can document them, study them, prove they exist to the scientific community, we can establish protected reserves. Real protection, not just one ranger trying to keep people away. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like they had thought this through, that they genuinely wanted to help. But I'd been in government service for 40 years. I knew how these things worked. Captured subjects don't get released into protected reserves. They get studied in facilities. They get tested. And anything inconvenient about their existence gets classified. I need to think about it, I said. You have 48 hours, Reeves said, standing. After that, we're moving forward with or without your cooperation. I'd prefer with. You care about these creatures, that's obvious. Help us help them. They left me sitting there with my supervisor, who looked deeply uncomfortable. Henrik, I don't know what this is about, but these people have authority from so high up that I can't even see the top. Whatever you're involved in, cooperate with them. Please. I drove back to my cabin in a daze. 48 hours. 2 days to figure out how to protect a family I'd spent most of my adult life keeping hidden. That night, I hiked up to the summer grounds one last time. The family was there, bedded down in the thick underbrush near a stream. I stayed back, watching from a distance. The old matriarch was grooming one of the youngsters, her movements gentle despite hands that could tear a branch as thick as my leg. The mother was teaching the other juvenile how to fish in the creek, demonstrating the quick grab technique for catching salmon. They were a family, not specimens, not subjects. A family trying to survive in a world that wanted to either prove they didn't exist or capture them now that they did. I made my decision. The next morning, I submitted my retirement papers. Immediate retirement, effective in 30 days, citing health concerns. My supervisor tried to talk me out of it, but I was firm. 40 years was enough. Time to move on. Then I went to work. I had 29 days before my retirement became official. 29 days to do what needed to be done. First, I destroyed all my personal records. Decades of observations, journals, photographs, everything that documented the family's existence in detail. I'd kept meticulous notes over the years, Scientific documentation, because that's how my mind worked. Maps of their territory. Growth charts for the juveniles. Behavioral patterns. Food sources. All of it went into my wood stove, page by page, while I committed what I could to memory. Second, I started a misdirection campaign. I filed reports of anomalous tracks in 3 other districts, spread across 50 miles. Sent anonymous tips to Bigfoot research organizations about sightings in Oregon and British Columbia. Created a paper trail suggesting the subjects were ranging much wider than they actually were. If Reeves and his people wanted to bring them in, I'd make sure they were looking in the wrong places. Third, and this was the part that terrified me, I had to warn the family somehow. I'd spent 37 years maintaining careful distance, observation without interference. The few times they'd acknowledged me directly, the deer carcass, the parallel patrols, had been their choice, not mine. Now I needed to break that protocol, needed to communicate danger in a way they'd understand. On September 22nd, I hiked to the summer grounds carrying a propane torch and materials I'd scavenged. Metal scraps, chain link fence sections, anything that looked artificial and threatening. I spent 6 hours building what looked like a cage, crude, only about 4 feet on each side, but clearly human-made. Clearly a trap. Then I set up the trail cameras and motion sensors around it that I'd confiscated from the government installations, making them obvious. No hiding, no subtlety. Finally, I triggered the sensors and let the cameras flash. I wanted them to associate these devices with danger. Then I backed off and waited. I heard them come in after dark. The wood knocking started first, communication between individuals, probably warning each other. Then I heard branches breaking, the sound of something large moving through the forest. I stayed hidden behind a deadfall about 50 yards away, watching through night vision binoculars I'd requisitioned from the district equipment locker. The old matriarch approached first, cautious. Even in her 70s, I was guessing at age, but she had to be at least that old. She moved with remarkable silence. She circled the cage setup, the sensors triggering their infrared beams. She reached out one massive hand and touched the chain link, rattled it. The cameras flashed. She jerked back, then deliberately smashed one of the cameras with a rock she grabbed from the ground. Targeted strike, completely intentional. The mother came next, with the juveniles hanging back. They examined everything while I watched, cataloging each piece of equipment, testing it, learning it. One of the youngsters picked up a sensor and turned it over, studying the satellite dish. The mother took it from him and carefully placed it in the stream, watching it sink. They knew. They understood that these human things were threats. Then the matriarch did something that still haunts me. She walked to where I was hidden, walked directly toward me, even though I'd approached from downwind and made no sound. She stood there, 10 feet away, and we looked at each other like we had that first time in 1987. 35 years later, and I still couldn't read that alien face. But she vocalized, that low, complex sound, and it sounded like acknowledgement, like goodbye. She turned and led her family upslope, toward the high ridges, away from the summer grounds they'd used for generations. They were leaving, probably heading deep into the wilderness where humans rarely went, where helicopters couldn't follow as easily. I watched them disappear into the darkness and knew I'd never see them again. Agent Reeves called me the next morning. The subjects moved. They broke their normal pattern and relocated to high country. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Wildlife relocates all the time, I said. Maybe your surveillance equipment spooked them. We found your installation, he said, voice cold. The fake trap. Very clever. You warned them. I don't know what you're talking about. You have 14 days until your retirement is official, Reeves said. After that, you're a civilian. Much easier to deal with if you cause problems. I'd think carefully about your next moves, Mr. Bergstrom. The threat was clear. I was protected by my federal employment for 2 more weeks. After that, I'd be vulnerable. I spent those 2 weeks doing everything I could to muddy the trail. I reported false sightings, filed paperwork indicating the subjects had probably left the area entirely, might have moved to Canada, closed access to the high country citing aggressive bear activity and dangerous snow conditions, even though it was only September. On October 3rd, my last day of official employment, I packed my truck with everything I owned. The cabin had been Forest Service property, so I couldn't stay there anyway. I'd already rented the apartment in Portland, far from any forest, surrounded by concrete and traffic noise. As I was loading the last box, a black SUV pulled up. Agent Chen got out alone. "Just wanted to say goodbye," she said. "And to let you know we're still looking for them. New technology, new techniques. It's only a matter of time." "Maybe they don't want to be found," I said. "Maybe." She studied me. "For what it's worth, I think you did right by them. 37 years of protection. That counts for something. But the world's changed. They can't stay hidden anymore. Nobody can." She handed me a card. Just a phone number, no name. "If you ever want to talk about what you know, call that number. We'd still value your input. We're not the monsters you think we are." "What are you then?" "Realists," she said. "The Pacific Northwest has maybe 50 breeding pairs left across 7 locations. Without intervention, they'll be extinct in 2 generations. We're trying to prevent that." "By capturing them?" "By documenting them, establishing legal protections. Yes, that requires some level of captivity initially, but..." "No," I said. "You want to believe that's what you're doing. But I've seen how government programs work. You'll put them in facilities, study them, maybe even try to breed them in captivity. They'll spend the rest of their lives in cages while scientists write papers and bureaucrats classify everything under national security." She didn't deny it, just got back in her SUV and drove away. I moved to Portland that afternoon. Studio apartment on the 4th floor, no view except other buildings. I donated most of my outdoor gear to a hiking store. Couldn't look at it anymore. Every piece of equipment reminded me of the mountains, of the forests, of a family I'd protected for most of my life and then had to warn away. The nightmares started immediately. I'd dream I was hiking through Fire Creek and I'd hear the wood knocking. But when I followed the sound, I'd find cages. Large primate enclosures like you see at research facilities. And inside them, the family, staring at me with those 2 human eyes. Accusation in their gaze. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, my body knowing I'd failed them, even though my brain insisted I'd done everything possible. For the first 6 months in Portland, I tried to forget, tried to build a new life. I got a part-time job at an outdoor equipment store, ironic, considering, and spent my evenings reading or watching television. Anything to keep my mind occupied. Anything to avoid thinking about the mountains. It didn't work. I started monitoring missing persons reports. It became an obsession. Every database I could access, every news article about hikers who didn't come back, every unsolved wilderness disappearance. I told myself I was just staying informed, but I knew what I was really doing. I was looking for patterns, evidence of them, and I found it. Olympic National Park, 3 hikers missing over 8 months, all in the same region. Last known positions formed a triangle around what looked like a watershed valley. No bodies recovered. Mount Hood Wilderness, experienced climber found dead from a fall that didn't match the terrain. Reports of animal screams the night before by other climbers. Investigation concluded in 2 days. Snoqualmie Pass. Trail camera at a logging company captured something moving through the frame at dusk. Bipedal. Massive. There for 3 seconds before the camera lost power. Image classified as equipment malfunction by the Forest Service. But I got a copy through a former colleague. It was them. No question. The government was tracking them. Reeves's people, or whoever they worked for, they had active surveillance on multiple sites across the Pacific Northwest. Every incident report I found had markers, investigations that concluded too quickly, evidence that disappeared, witnesses who suddenly stopped talking to media. But they hadn't caught them. 37 years of my protection had taught the family I'd watched to be careful, to avoid detection. And maybe, I wanted to believe this, they'd taught others. Maybe there was communication between populations, warning systems. On March 14th, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Bergstrom, this is Elise Brennan. I'm a wildlife biologist with the University of Washington. I was given your name by someone at the Forest Service who suggested you might be willing to talk about unusual animal behavior, Gifford Pinchot. I almost hung up. Instead, I said, "What kind of unusual behavior?" "Large primate sightings. I'm doing research on indigenous legends and trying to correlate them with actual wildlife reports. Your name came up in relation to Sector 7. You were the ranger there for nearly 4 decades. I'm retired. I understand, but I'd love to buy you coffee and just talk. No recording, no formal interview. Just conversation." We met at a cafe in downtown Portland. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with the earnest intensity of someone who genuinely cared about her research. She spread out maps and reports, asked careful questions about habitat and territorial behavior. Never said Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Just talked about large unidentified primates and cryptid populations. Halfway through our second cup of coffee, she pulled out a photograph. This was taken by a trail camera near Lake Quinault in January. The camera was part of a spotted owl monitoring program. When they reviewed the footage, they found this. The image showed a creature moving through deep snow, bipedal, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair, moving at dusk, partially obscured by trees, but unmistakable. One of them. The camera was destroyed 2 days later, Elise said. Smashed completely. Not bear damage, the remains showed it had been struck with something hard, like a rock, with precision. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been tracking reports for 3 years, and there's a pattern. Wherever they're cited, federal agents show up within days. They confiscate evidence, classify reports, and shut down research. 3 colleagues who were investigating similar phenomena have had their funding pulled or their positions eliminated. This isn't normal wildlife management. Someone is actively suppressing information about these creatures. Maybe they have good reasons. Maybe. Or maybe they want to control the narrative. If these creatures exist, and I believe they do, they represent one of the most significant zoological discoveries in history. But instead of protecting their habitat and studying them ethically, there seems to be a program to capture them. I've traced equipment orders, federal budget allocations. Someone is running an active collection operation. I felt ice in my gut. Collection, capture, and containment. They're building something in eastern Oregon. High-security facility, officially listed as a wildlife rehabilitation center, but with specifications that don't match any rehab facility I've ever seen. Reinforced enclosures rated for primates up to 800 pounds, specialized medical equipment. The budget line items are buried in USDA reports, but I found them. You should stop looking, I said. These people, whoever they are, they're not going to appreciate civilian researchers interfering. I know, but someone has to document this. Someone has to... She stopped because I'd grabbed her wrist, hard enough to make her gasp. Stop, I said. Stop researching this. Stop asking questions. Stop looking for them. If they exist, and if they've survived this long, it's because people like me kept them hidden. Every person who tries to document them, every researcher who wants to make their career on finding them, you're all just painting targets on them. The best thing you can do for these creatures is forget you ever heard about them. I let her go and walked out of the cafe. She didn't follow, but she didn't stop either. 2 weeks later, Elise Brennan's body was found in her apartment, Carbon monoxide poisoning. Faulty heater, according to the official report. Tragic accident. The police investigation closed in 3 days. I went to her funeral, stood in the back, watching her parents and friends grieve. Watching federal agents, I recognized the type, even without Reeves and Chen present, taking photographs of everyone in attendance. That night, I dug the business card out of my desk drawer, the one Chen had given me with just a phone number. I stared at it for an hour, then tore it into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. They'd killed Elise Brennan. Maybe not directly, but they'd made her a problem, and problems get eliminated. Carbon monoxide poisoning is almost impossible to distinguish from deliberate asphyxiation if you know what you're doing. The message was clear. Stop interfering, or become another tragic accident. I'd spent 37 years protecting a family of creatures that shouldn't exist. I'd thrown away relationships, career advancement, any chance at a normal life. And in the end, I'd failed them anyway. They were being hunted, systematically tracked across their remaining habitat, and anyone who tried to help them disappeared. I lasted another 4 months before I broke my silence. What finally pushed me over the edge was seeing Agent Chen on television. She was testifying before a congressional subcommittee about wildlife management in federal lands. Dry, boring testimony about endangered species protections and habitat conservation. But I recognized the evasion patterns, the careful language. She was testifying about funding for the collection program, hiding it in plain sight under conservation budgets. That night, I started going through my backup files. Even though I'd burned my physical journals, I'd kept digital records, encrypted, hidden in cloud storage under false names. But they existed. 37 years of observations, GPS coordinates, behavioral notes, photographs, everything. I'd told myself I destroyed them, but I hadn't. Some part of me knew this moment would come. I spent 3 weeks organizing the data, sanitizing anything that would lead directly to current locations. I kept historical data, patterns, evidence of their existence. But I removed anything that would help Reeves and his people predict current movements. Then I sent copies to 15 different sources: wildlife conservation organizations, news outlets, documentary filmmakers, scientific journals, academic researchers who'd published papers on cryptozoology. I blasted it everywhere simultaneously so they couldn't suppress it all. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, my files had been shared across social media platforms millions of times. News networks were running segments. Scientists were analyzing the data on live television. The clear, documented evidence of a population of large bipedal primates in the Pacific Northwest became the biggest zoological story in decades. And 48 hours after that, I was sitting in a windowless room in a federal building downtown, facing Agent Reeves and Agent Chen. "That was incredibly stupid," Reeves said. His voice was calm, but I could see the rage underneath. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Made it impossible for you to hide them anymore," I said. "You've painted a target on every one of them," Chen said. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "We had 3 confirmed populations under surveillance. Stable groups, reproducing, surviving. Within the last 2 days, we've detected incursions by private parties into all 3 territories. Trophy hunters, thrill seekers. Your little disclosure has started a gold rush." That hit me harder than I expected. You thought public awareness would protect them," Reeves said. "You thought documentation would lead to conservation. You're a fool. What it's led to is chaos. We've already intercepted 2 hunting parties. 2, and those are just the ones we knew about. How many others are out there right now, hiking into those mountains with rifles?" "Then do your job," I said. "If you actually care about protecting them, close those areas, deploy rangers, enforce restrictions." "We're trying," Chen said. But the cat's out of the bag. Every wannabe cryptozoologist and adventure tourist with a camera is heading for the forests. We're triaging as best we can, but we can't secure hundreds of square miles of wilderness. Not quickly. Reeves leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help us bring them in. All of them. The populations we know about and any others you haven't disclosed. We have a facility. Yes, the one your researcher friend found, that can house them safely while we establish legal protections. Once they're in controlled environments, we can work on genuine conservation strategies. Breeding programs, habitat restoration. But right now, in the wild, they're vulnerable. You want to put them in cages. I want to keep them alive, Reeves said. You've already doomed them by going public. The question now is whether they die in the forest being hunted by civilians, or whether they survive in captivity until we can make the forest safe again. I looked at Chen. She wouldn't meet my eyes. You're asking me to help you cage them. I'm asking you to help us save them from the mess you created, Reeves said. They gave me 72 hours to decide. 3 days to choose between helping them round up the survivors of a species I'd spent my life protecting, or watching those creatures get slaughtered by trophy hunters and thrill seekers drawn by my disclosure. I went back to my apartment and didn't sleep for 2 days. I monitored news coverage, watched the social media explosion, read the scientific debates. Some researchers were calling for immediate expeditions. Others warned about habitat disturbance. Conservation groups were split between demands for protection and concerns about disrupting the populations. And in the forums, in the comments, in the dark corners of the internet, I saw them organizing. The hunters, the ones who wanted to be the person who brought in the body, who proved once and for all that they existed. Bounties were being offered, illegal, but who was going to enforce that? Expedition companies were already advertising Sasquatch tracking tours. I'd created this. In trying to protect them through disclosure, I'd unleashed something worse. On the third day, I called the number Reeves had given me. I'll help you, I said. On one condition. The creatures you capture, they're treated humanely. Not research subjects, not zoo specimens. You build them an actual sanctuary. Protected land where they can live as naturally as possible. Done, Reeves said. He'd won and we both knew it. The capture operations took 3 months. I won't describe them in detail, partially because the specifics are classified, and partially because I don't want to remember. The technology they used was sophisticated. Tranquilizer systems, thermal tracking, sound analysis to pinpoint locations, and terrain mapping that predicted movement patterns with frightening accuracy. I was there for all of it. They insisted. My knowledge of the creature's behavior, my decades of observation, I was the secret weapon that made it possible. We brought in 47 individuals from 7 locations. 47. That's all that was left. 47 survivors of a species that had probably once numbered in the thousands, reduced to scattered family groups hiding in the deepest wilderness. The family from Gifford Pinchot, my family, though I had no right to call them that, was among them. The old matriarch had died in the 2 years since I'd warned them, but her daughter and grandchildren were captured in the high ridges where they'd relocated. They saw me there when they were sedated and caged. The daughter looked at me with those 2 human eyes as the drugs took effect. I'd betrayed them twice now, first by exposing them, then by helping capture them. The facility in Eastern Oregon is state-of-the-art. That's what Reeves kept telling me as he gave me the tour after the operations concluded. 200 acres of enclosed forest, designed to mimic natural habitat as closely as possible. Caves for shelter, streams stocked with salmon, vegetation appropriate to their diet, medical facilities that could handle anything from dental work to complicated births. A gilded cage is still a cage. They separated the populations initially, worried about conflict between unrelated groups. But they've started integration now, carefully monitored, but allowing natural social structures to develop. There have been births, 5 in the past year. The population is stable for the first time in decades. That's what I tell myself when the guilt gets too heavy. The facility isn't open to the public. Only a handful of researchers have access, all extensively vetted and classified. The subjects, they still call them subjects, not creatures or beings, are studied remotely. Non-invasive monitoring, blood samples during medical checkups, behavioral observation. It could be worse. In the 1960s, they would have been dissected. Small comfort. I'm allowed to visit, part of my agreement. I go once a month, driving the 3 hours to the facility, passing through 5 security checkpoints. I sit in the observation room and watch them through one-way glass. They know it's there. They're not stupid, but they've adapted. They live their lives, raise their young, exist in the space we've given them. The daughter from Gifford Pinchot gave birth last spring, a healthy male fathered by one of the Olympic population. Hybrid genetics, which the researchers are excited about. Genetic diversity. I watched through the glass as she cradled her newborn, grooming him with gentle hands, the same way her mother had groomed her all those years ago when I'd spied on them in the wild. She looked up at the observation window, at me, and I swear there was recognition. After everything, she remembered. I wrote this account because Chen was right about one thing. The world has changed. Climate change is destroying what's left of their natural habitat. Human expansion is relentless. Even if I'd kept them hidden for another decade, another generation, eventually someone would have found them. The surveillance technology is too good now. The wilderness is too small. Maybe Reeves was right. Maybe captivity was the only way to ensure survival. But I'll go to my grave wondering if we had the right to make that choice for them. To decide that survival in a cage was better than freedom with risk. The facility is working on a long-term plan. Generations from now, when the climate stabilizes and wilderness corridors can be secured, they talk about reintroduction, releasing them back into protected habitat with legal protections in place. The Pacific Northwest Primate Sanctuary has purchased tens of thousands of acres of forest. With luck and proper management, maybe by 2075 there will be safe places for them. But the creatures in the facility now, the ones I helped capture, they'll never see true wilderness again. They'll live their lives in that 200-acre enclosure, under observation, eating food provided by humans. Their every movement monitored and cataloged. Their children might be released, maybe their grandchildren, but they're prisoners for life. I betrayed them 3 times in the end. First, by exposing them to the world. Second, by helping capture them. Third, by convincing myself that it was for their own good. There are nights I can't sleep. I lie in my studio apartment in Portland, listening to sirens and traffic, and I remember the forests. The silence after snowfall. Wood knocking in the distance. The feeling of being watched by something ancient and wild and beyond my understanding. The sense that I was sharing space with something remarkable. All of that is gone now. Cataloged. Classified. Contained. If you're reading this, you probably followed the news coverage. You probably have opinions about whether disclosure was right or wrong, whether captive conservation is ethical or monstrous. I don't have answers anymore. I'm 68 years old, and the defining mission of my life ended with creatures in cages. But I'll tell you this. If you go into the forests of the Pacific Northwest, if you hike the deep backcountry where humans rarely go, you might hear stories from old-timers. Tales about wild men in the woods, creatures that walk like humans, but aren't human. Wood knocking in the night, massive footprints found near remote streams. Don't dismiss those stories. Don't assume they're legends or hoaxes. And if you're ever lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to encounter something that shouldn't exist, think very carefully about what you do next. Because the worst betrayal isn't exposure or capture. It's the arrogant certainty that you know what's best for a species that was thriving long before humans walked these forests. We wanted to save them. Instead, we made them ours. We made them specimens, subjects, conservation projects. We took the last wild things and made them tame. I visit the facility every month. I watch them through the glass. And I live with the knowledge that I'm the reason they're there. The daughter from Gifford Pinchot. She's 27 now, as near as I can estimate. She had her second child last fall. She's a good mother, protective. She teaches them to fish in the artificial stream, to build sleeping nests in the provided caves, to communicate with the complex vocalizations I first heard 37 years ago in a forest that doesn't exist anymore. Not for them. Not really. The wilderness has been mapped and monitored and made safe. And in making it safe, we've destroyed the last spaces where the truly wild could survive. That's my confession. That's my warning. The creatures I protected for 37 years are alive, stable, breeding. By every metric of conservation biology, we succeeded. Their population is recovering. In 50 years, maybe they'll walk in forests again. But they'll never be free, and that's on me.